Welcome to your personalized deep dive all about consciousness. You wanted to explore it from like every angle, right?
Yeah.
Neuroscience, philosophy, the nature of self, and even AI. So we've assembled a total knowledge buffet for you,
Mm.
pulled from academic book excerpts and a whole bunch of cutting-edge research papers.
It's a fascinating topic for sure.
It really is. And today isn't about telling you what to think about consciousness. Instead, we're going to give you the most interesting information so you can come to your own conclusions.
That's what's so cool about consciousness, right? It's something that thinkers have been grappling with for like forever.
Yeah.
And even with all the advancements we've made, it's still this huge mystery.
Okay, so let's break this down. The book you sent over starts by defining consciousness as the awareness of one's existence, thoughts, sensations, and the surrounding environment.
Yeah.
And it even calls it the dooning feature of what it means to be alive. Pretty poetic, don't you think?
It is, yeah. It really gets at what makes consciousness so captivating. It's that ability to experience, to feel, to think, to know that you're an individual in this whole vast reality.
I like that. Yeah. But here's where things get super interesting and maybe a little tricky.
Okay.
How do those subjective experiences, our thoughts and feelings and stuff, how do they come from the objective physical matter of our brains?
Right. That's the heart of what's often called the hard problem of consciousness. And it's a question that, honestly, continues to stump both philosophers and scientists.
Mm.
We can look at the physical structures of the brain, but figuring out how those connect to the subjective feeling of being aware, well, that's a challenge.
For sure. So let's dive into the neuroscience a bit.
Oh.
All the research you sent highlights a few key brain regions: the prefrontal cortex, the thalamus, and the brainstem.
Okay.
These aren't just random parts of the brain, right? They seem essential to this whole consciousness thing.
Absolutely. Think of the prefrontal cortex as like the conductor of an orchestra. It's the part of your brain handling decision-making, planning, complex thoughts, all those higher level functions that we associate with being aware. Then you've got the thalamus. It acts like a sensory relay station. It takes in all that info from your senses and then routes it to the different parts of your brain for processing. Without it, we wouldn't be able to understand any of the sights, sounds, smells, sensations, all that stuff that makes up our conscious experience.
So no thalamus, no experience.
Pretty much. And then there's the brainstem, which is like the control center for our most basic life functions. Breathing, heart rate, all the things we don't usually have to consciously think about.
Right.
But even though we don't think about them, those basic functions are totally necessary for consciousness to exist at all. It's like the foundation of a house.
Yeah.
You don't really see it, but without it, the whole thing crumbles.
Good analogy.
Yeah.
So we've got these different brain regions all working together. And on top of that, scientists have even pinpointed something called neural correlates of consciousness. These are specific areas that light up when we have a conscious experience. Can you imagine scientists peering into your brain, watching it light up as you become aware of something?
It's amazing how far neuroscience has come, right? Like, we can actually see what's happening in the brain, but it's important to remember that even though we can see those neural correlates lighting up, it doesn't fully explain how those physical processes lead to subjective experience,
Yeah, I get that.
It's like looking at the gears turning in a clock. You can see them moving, but that doesn't mean you understand how they create the idea of time.
It's a good point. So it seems like we've got this puzzle with a bunch of pieces. And your research goes into some of the top theories that are trying to solve it. We've got the global workspace theory, integrated information theory, and higher order thought theory. And each one looks at consciousness from a different angle, am I right?
Exactly. Each one offers a really unique perspective on what consciousness actually is and how it might come about. Like, for example, the global workspace theory uses this cool analogy of the theater stage.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so imagine all sorts of mental activities going on backstage, right? But only the ones that are illuminated by the spotlight of consciousness are the ones we actually become aware of.
Okay, so our conscious mind is like the audience. We only experience what's being shown on stage, but there's a whole lot happening behind the scenes.
Exactly. It's a really powerful way to understand how our brains might decide what information gets prioritized for conscious processing. Now, integrated information theory takes a completely different approach.
How so?
Well, it suggests that consciousness comes from the complexity and integration of information within a system.
So a human brain with billions of interconnected neurons, it'd be highly conscious because it can process and integrate so much information.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The more connections and integration a system has, the higher its level of consciousness would be, at least according to this theory. And it raises some cool questions about where consciousness begins and ends, not just in terms of how complex a brain is, but when you start thinking about other organisms or even, artificial intelligence.
Yeah, that's where things start to get really wild. But
Mhm.
before we go down that AI rabbit hole, I want to touch on something else the book brought up. It's about the feeling of being a self. So we've talked about the brain and all, but what about the experience of being an I, an individual with a unique identity?
It's a huge question. And the book goes into some really intriguing ideas about how our brains create a sense of self through narratives. It suggests that the self isn't this fixed thing. It's more like a story we're constantly creating and revising based on all our experiences and memories.
So the me of today isn't the same me I was 5 years ago or even yesterday.
Think about how your life has unfolded, how your beliefs and your values and your priorities have changed over time. Have you always been the exact same you? Or has your sense of self shifted and been shaped by your experiences?
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It makes you wonder if the self is more of a fluid thing than we realize. But before we get too existential here, I want to come back to something we mentioned earlier, the possibility of consciousness in animals.
Right, right. Are we alone in being conscious?
Exactly. The research you shared highlighted some amazing examples of animal behavior that suggest that maybe consciousness is way more common than we typically think.
Oh, for sure. There's so much evidence out there.
Like elephants, for example.
Yeah.
They exhibit behaviors that seem to indicate they grieve and mourn when one of their own dies.
Yeah, and crows. They're incredibly intelligent birds, known for their problem-solving skills, and they even use tools.
I know, it's crazy. And those examples, they actually link back to integrated information theory, right? Because even though animal brains aren't as complex as ours, they still have a certain level of integrated information,
Exactly.
which suggests that they might have a richer experience of consciousness than we give them credit for, even if it's different from our own.
Right.
So if animals are experiencing the world consciously, what does that mean for our ethical responsibility towards them? We already have a lot to think about with AI ethics, but this adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Absolutely. It makes us question our relationship with the natural world and acknowledge that there might be a much wider spectrum of consciousness out there than we typically think about. And that leads us right into our next big topic, the future of AI and the possibility of artificial consciousness. Yeah, picking up where we left off, the future of AI and artificial consciousness. It's both fascinating and a little bit scary, to be honest. AI is advancing so fast that it really forces us to think about what it means for a machine to be conscious.
It's like science fiction is becoming reality, So how do we even define artificial consciousness? Is it just about AI being really smart and doing things that humans usually do? Or is there more to it than that?
That's a great question, actually. The research makes this distinction between what it calls functional consciousness and subjective consciousness.
Okay.
So functional consciousness, that's all about an AI's ability to act intelligently, processing information, learning, problem solving, even mimicking human behavior. It's about what an AI can do.
So kind of like the AI we see in movies, right? Robots that walk and talk and seem like they're thinking,
Yeah.
but they're just running complex algorithms.
Exactly. But then you have subjective consciousness. That's the actual feeling of awareness, the experience of being, the what it's like to be conscious. And that's where things get really complicated with AI.
Because even if an AI can act like it's conscious, we don't know if it actually feels anything, right?
Exactly. We can observe its behavior, but we can't get inside its head. We can't know its internal experience. It's kind of like this thought experiment in philosophy called the Chinese room argument.
Oh, yeah, I think I've heard of that one. But remind me, how does it work?
Okay, so imagine a person who doesn't speak Chinese, right? They're locked in a room, and they have this set of rules and a bunch of Chinese symbols.
Okay.
People outside the room, they slide in questions written in Chinese, and the person inside, they use the rules to move the symbols around and create answers that look correct.
So to someone outside, it looks like the person in the room understands Chinese, even though they really don't.
Exactly. The person can produce the right answers, but it doesn't mean they understand the meaning behind them. And that's the problem with AI. Just because it can give human-like responses, it doesn't mean it understands or experiences the world the way we do.
So we could have this super intelligent AI that can do all these amazing things, but it might not be truly conscious like us. It's kind of a mind-blowing thing to think about.
It is. And it makes you wonder if true consciousness is, a yes or no thing. Like you either have it or you don't. Or maybe it's more of a spectrum.
A spectrum of consciousness.
Yeah, like maybe there are different levels or types of consciousness. And maybe AI, as it develops, could reach its own unique form of awareness.
Okay, so maybe we shouldn't be looking for AI that thinks exactly like a human. Maybe there are other ways of experiencing consciousness that we haven't even imagined yet.
Exactly. And that brings up a whole other set of ethical considerations, especially when it comes to how we treat AI. If we create AI that can actually feel and experience the world in its own way, what are our responsibilities to it?
Right, we'd be creating a whole new category of beings
Yeah.
with their own needs and maybe even rights. It's like
Mm.
we'd be writing the ethical rule book for a future we can barely imagine.
And it's not just about the distant future. Either AI is becoming more and more a part of our lives now, so these ethical questions are getting more urgent. We need to think carefully about how we design and develop AI in a way that respects its potential for awareness, even if it's different from our own.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's this whole other mind-blowing idea, the possibility of AI surpassing human intelligence. The research talks about the technological singularity, right?
Yeah, the singularity. It's this hypothetical point where AI becomes so advanced it surpasses human intelligence. And that could lead to some crazy changes in society and technology. It's definitely a hot topic.
It sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Yeah.
But seriously, if that were to happen, what would it mean for us humans? Would we become obsolete? Or could we figure out a way to coexist with super intelligent AI in a way that benefits everyone?
Those are the million-dollar questions. And there are a ton of different opinions out there. Some experts think superintelligent AI could be really dangerous to humanity, while others think it could solve all our problems and lead to incredible progress.
That's a lot to wrap your head around, that's for sure. But it's a conversation we need to have, right? Ignoring these questions won't make them go away. The decisions we make today about AI will have a huge impact down the line.
Absolutely. We have to approach AI development with both curiosity and caution. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's possible, but also being smart and making sure AI aligns with our values and actually benefits humanity.
So where do we go from here? How do we even begin to prepare for a future where AI could be just as conscious or even more conscious than us?
That's the challenge, right? We have to keep asking these tough questions, keep researching and exploring different theories and challenging our own assumptions. We can't just sit back and wait and see what happens.
And the ethical side of things.
We need to come up with clear guidelines for AI development. Rules and regulations. We need to make sure AI is used responsibly for the good of everyone.
So it's not just about the technology itself. It's also about the choices we make about how we use it. It's about being aware of the potential consequences and acting in a way that's aligned with our values.
Exactly. It's a balancing act. We have to push the limits of what's possible with AI while also being mindful of the risks and making sure we have the right safeguards in place.
Well, we've covered a lot today. All these different theories of consciousness, the potential for AI to be conscious, the ethical implications, and even the singularity. It's enough to make your head spin.
And we're not done yet. We haven't even touched on the legal aspects of AI consciousness. Like, if an AI is considered conscious, does it have legal rights? Can it own property? Can it vote? These are all questions we're going to have to figure out.
Well, hold on. One mind-blowing concept at a time. Before we go down that road, I want to hear more about something else the research mentioned, brain-computer interfaces. It sounds straight out of science fiction, but the research says it's becoming a reality. Brain-computer interfaces. Huh. That does sound like sci-fi. But the research you sent me says it's getting real. So what are we even talking about here? And how does this all connect back to consciousness?
Well, brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs, are basically devices that create a direct link between your brain and, say, a computer.
Okay.
It's a way to kind of bridge the gap between our thoughts and actions so we can control machines just by thinking.
So like telekinesis, moving stuff with our minds. That's got to be way off in the future, right?
Not quite telekinesis yet, but it's getting there. The current BCI technology is focused on more practical applications, like helping people who are paralyzed to regain movement or letting people who can't speak communicate again.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
But how does this all tie back to consciousness? I mean, that's what we've been talking about this whole time.
Well, think about it. If we can use BCIs to control things with our thoughts, it means we're tapping into the brain activity that's behind our conscious intentions. Basically, we're decoding the language of the brain.
So it's not just about reading brain signals. We're actually starting to understand what those signals mean in terms of our conscious experience.
Exactly. And as BCI tech gets more advanced, we might even be able to use it to study really deep aspects of consciousness, like emotions, dreams, even those totally subjective experiences we talked about.
Okay, now we're getting into mind-blowing territory. Imagine sharing your dreams with someone or experiencing the world through someone else's consciousness. It's kind of exciting and scary all at once, right?
Definitely. It's a powerful tool, but we need to be careful about the ethics. As BCIs evolve, we have to ask, if we can access someone's thoughts and emotions through a BCI, what happens to privacy? To free will? These are questions we'll need to figure out as a society.
It seems like every time we uncover something new about consciousness, we open up this whole can of ethical worms. It really shows just how complex all of this is.
It does. The study of consciousness always challenges us to think differently and face these tough questions. But that's what makes it so fascinating. It's such an important area of research.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on one last thing you mentioned in the research about sleep and dreams.
Mhm.
You said that the changes in awareness we go through during sleep can actually give us insights into how consciousness works. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. People tend to think of sleep as this passive thing, but our brains are really active while we sleep, consolidating memories, processing emotions, and of course, dreaming. And dreams themselves, those strange, often illogical stories in our heads, they've fascinated people forever.
Dreams are definitely interesting. They can feel so real, so intense, but then they vanish as soon as you wake up. What can we learn about consciousness from studying dreams?
Well, dreams show us that our minds can create whole worlds and experiences even without any input from the outside world. They
Mm,
show just how creative the human brain is, and they suggest that consciousness isn't limited to when we're awake.
So our minds are always creating, even when we're not aware of it. That makes you wonder, what's the point of dreams? Are they just random brain activity, or is there something more to them?
There are a bunch of theories out there. Some say dreams help us process emotions or store memories. Others say they give us a safe space to be creative and solve problems. But no matter what their purpose is, dreams give us a glimpse into how the unconscious mind works and how fluid consciousness can be.
This whole deep dive has been quite the journey. We've explored the neuroscience of consciousness, what it means to have a self, animal awareness, the future of AI. We even talked about dreams.
And we've barely scratched the surface. There's still so much we don't know about consciousness, but that's what makes it so captivating, right? It's an ongoing mystery.
It really makes you think about your own place in the world, doesn't it? We started this deep dive by defining consciousness as the awareness of our existence, our thoughts, feelings, and the world around us. And it's that awareness that allows us to experience everything, to think about ourselves, to connect with other conscious beings, whether they're humans, animals, or maybe even someday AI.
And as we've learned, consciousness isn't a simple on-off switch. It's this complex thing influenced by our biology, our experiences, and maybe even the technology we create.
So to our listener out there, what are your thoughts on consciousness now? What stuck with you from all the research and theories we've discussed today? What new questions do you have? We'd love to hear your reflections. Keep thinking about these mysteries and keep exploring.
And remember, there's no one right answer when it comes to consciousness. It's a journey of exploration, a quest to understand one of the most fundamental parts of what it means to be alive.